Ladies and gentlemen, beautiful people, welcome to the 97 Republic YouTube channel, where we react to news and live events of different sports. So I kindly ask that you hit the like button and the subscribe button, as that will really help this channel grow. And to ensure you don't skip a beat, click the notification bell as well. That way you can guarantee that you don't miss any of the action. Alright, so let's go. Ranking the top 5 knockouts of guys that are fighting on the main card of UFC Fight Night Cannonier versus Rodrigues. So, quick intro. Basically what I did is I looked at every single fighter on the main card, took their best knockout, and basically matched them up with one another, coming up with this list. And some brutal visuals that you will be seeing in this video, and couldn't get myself to look away. For some odd reason, felt like I was enchanted, staring in admiration, like looking at a dark-haired, pale-skinned woman with a fatty, and you could not. So at number 5, Jared Cannonier versus Derek Brunson. Now let me set the scene. So UFC 271, Adesanya versus Robert Whittaker for the middleweight championship, and at the time Jared Cannonier was a disruptive force inside of the middleweight division. Started as heavyweight, went down to light heavyweight, then went down to middleweight. It started as a Whopper, then became a normal cheeseburger, and then a McDonald's cheeseburger, and in the middleweight division, just destructive. Out of his 5 fights, won 4 of them, only lost to Robert Whittaker, who, as I mentioned, fought Izzy at the time for the middleweight championship. And on the same card, after beating Kelvin Gastelum, Jared Cannonier fought Derek Brunson, and it was the general consensus that if Cannonier could finish and beat Derek Brunson, he would be the #1 contender to fight the winner of Izzy versus Raw, who turned out to be Izzy. And statement was made, to say the least. Jared Cannonier ended up delivering some malicious elbows to Derek Brunson's face, and looked like he wanted to maybe decapitate Derek Brunson, basically putting an end to the mythical fighter Blonde Brunson. And after that, Jared Cannonier established himself as being the #1 contender. Then number 4 on the list, Edmund Shahbazyan versus Brad Tavares. So Edmund Shahbazyan started on Dana White's Contender Series, ended up winning that fight, and then basically competed in the Ultimate Fighter. So went and made it to the finale of the Ultimate Fighter and ended up winning that fight as well, therefore being warranted a UFC contract. And in 2019, Edmund Shahbazyan made his UFC debut in March, beating Charles Byrd by a knockout. Then went on in July in 2019, fought Jack Marshman and ended up beating him via submission. And in the end of 2019, Edmund Shahbazyan took on Brad Tavares in November in his 3rd fight in the UFC middleweight division, and ended up knocking out Brad Tavares cold with an incredible head kick, with excellent timing, and therefore being crowned and having the name the Golden Boy. Now obviously, as we know, it went somewhat downhill for Edmund Shahbazyan after that fight, but just the fact that he was able to knock out Brad Tavares in that fashion. This is a Brad Tavares who is extremely durable, has been a seasoned veteran inside of the UFC, has fought since 2010. An incredible performance by the Golden Boy, Edmund Shahbazyan, 2019. What a year. If only he knew what the future held at the time, right? So then we move on to number 3, and this is where it starts getting brutal. At number 3, Calvin Kattar versus Jeremy Stephens. So Calvin Kattar at the time in the featherweight division was 4-5 inside of the UFC. Went on to lose to Zabit Magomedsharipov via unanimous decision, and then got scheduled to fight Jeremy Stephens in May of 2020. During the peak of COVID. But you thought COVID had a massive impact. Um, Wait till you see the impact Calvin Kattar's elbow had on Jeremy Stephens' face. Probably one of the most destructive elbows ever seen inside of the UFC. Basically, closing the distance, entering the pocket, and delivering one of the most beautiful elbows you'll ever see inside of the sport. And a wise man once said,
"You can hit hard like that, but I can hit way harder like that. Fucking boom! You could just it's so much more torque."
Now, it would probably have showed what Jeremy Stephens' face looked like after eating those punches, but well, due to censorship, would not be doing it. Just say some blood coming off the face of Jeremy Stephens after that exchange. And therefore I have Calvin Kattar versus Jeremy Stephens at number 3. Just one of the most beautiful elbows ever seen inside of the sport. And with destructive force. Never seen someone put that much effort into an elbow strike. And then at number 2, Ismael Bonfim versus Terence Mckinney. Ismael Bonfim, probably one of the coolest surnames inside of the UFC, got his contract to fight in the UFC after competing and winning on Dana White's Contender Series, and ended up making his debut on January the 21st of 2023 against Terence Mckinney. Yes, his debut fight. And on this particular card, his brother Gabriel Bonfim also fought. But Gabriel was scheduled to fight after Ismael, so Gabriel actually stood in the stands and watched his brother fight Terence Mckinney. And you could see in the fight itself, down at the bottom they had a little screen where Gabriel Bonfim actually looked at Ismael fight Terence Mckinney. And rumor has it, the legend goes, that Ismael Bonfim carried a shovel with him to the octagon because he wanted to bury his knee inside of the neck of Terence Mckinney. One of the greatest flying knees you will ever see in your life. Might I say, George Masvidal-esque in execution. On his debut, sent Terence Mckinney to the Shadow Realm to go pay Ben Askren a visit. One of the best knockouts on a debut we have ever seen and probably will ever see in this sport. And then moving on to number 1. Now, it's number 1 not because it is as spectacular, but the reason why this is number 1, the next one, is due to its brutality. And number 1 on this list is Gregory Rodrigues versus Dennis Tiuliulin, August 19, 2023. Gregory Rodrigues recently came off a loss, his first ever knockout loss in his UFC career against Bruno Ferreira. And Gregory decided that he was going to exact vengeance on whoever was unfortunate enough to stand across him inside of the octagon, and that unfortunate soul happened to be Dennis Tiuliulin. And Gregory Rodrigues ended up knocking out, to say it politely, ended up knocking out Dennis Tiuliulin via execution. Now, the reason is number 1 on the list is because it looks like, if you ever had to see something like this on the street, you would either probably, your instincts would either tell you to, or you would end up calling the police and explaining exactly what you just witnessed. It is incredibly brutal, and that is why it is number 1 on the list. Not as spectacular as the rest, but looks like a medieval execution. They had Gregory in medieval times stand at the back, and if somebody committed a heinous crime, then instead of using the old guillotine, they would have Gregory come out and land those things on your head, and you would probably cease to exist. And that is basically the top 5 ranking of knockouts of guys fighting on the main card of UFC Fight Night Cannonier versus Rodrigues. Let me know if there's any that I've missed. Let me know whether the order is correct. Do you think that Bonfim should be at number 1? Is Gregory Rodrigues' knockout over Dennis Tiuliulin warranted at number 1? Let me know, I'd really appreciate it. And enjoy UFC Fight Night, Jared Cannonier versus Gregory Rodrigues.